So we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome to the Remix Austin meetup for August. I'm Jacob Wolf. I am a senior solutions engineer at Beehive. Previously gave a talk here, and one of the folks that helps co-organize this thing alongside Mark, Seth, Lucas, and Brooks, who are all here. So we have two different speakers today. But before we get to them, we are going to go through a couple different housekeeping notes and announcements. If you are new here, welcome to the Remix Austin meetup. If you have no idea what Remix is, well, there's plenty of people here that use it and could explain more. But one of the, well, I guess Remix technically not is going to be anymore, which is one of these announcements. Previously, Remix was one of the larger and most used React-based JavaScript frameworks for the web. A full-stack JavaScript framework that was very popular in adoption, but also made by the team behind React Router, which they moved, as we've talked about here before, but they moved Remix into React Router last year, and now Remix is becoming its own thing, which I'll get to in a second, which is our point 3. And so quick housekeeping notes and announcements. There's a new blog post up that is available now in the data mode part of React Router for React Server components. If you've not been following this entire saga, React Server components have been actually very difficult for the folks over at Vite to implement, but they are now much more closer to implementing that. And subsequently, the React Router team has put out a new beta to actually use React Server components. I've not gotten the opportunity to yet, but I'm super excited to do that, and I look forward to trying it out. So that's sort of point number 1. You can find that blog post on the Remix Run blog. Secondly, React Router is moving to an open governance model. As I'll cover here in point 3 in a second, the React Router team is working on a new version of Remix that is not related to React, and subsequently realized that they would like the help of the community to get more involved in pushing and maintaining the React Router project going forward, and so subsequently have opened up to use an open governance model to bring more people on board to help maintain the framework. Another blog post on that also on Remix Run's blog. And then lastly, Remix v3 is in the works. So as I mentioned earlier, React Router got basically all the benefits of Remix previously. So now it can have the ability to be a full stack React framework and have both server and client side code. And subsequently, now Remix is being, Brooks, how would you say, rebranded, relaunched? Refitted, that's a good word. So Remix is now becoming its own project that the team at Shopify and Remix are putting together that is, what was Ryan's exact words? Rethinking the DOM, something similar to that? Sure. But rethinking about how websites are built in JavaScript and presented through the DOM. So another great blog post to go read up on that as well. And so yeah, those are sort of the housekeeping notes. Our first speaker is Christian Farris. Is going to talk about React Router primitives. Christian, you want to come on up and give an introduction to yourself and give us a little bit about what you want to talk about on React Router.
Nice. Awesome. Hi. Thank you all for coming. My name is Christian Farris. I'm a senior software engineer at Docker, the container company. Today I'm going to be talking about debouncing with React Router primitives. So about a year and a half ago at Docker, we were looking at our web applications and decided to start moving over to Remix back in V2 and now React Router. When doing that, we pretty much moved over a lot of our system, rethought a lot of things. So today, I'm going to be talking about some of that. Looking at the talk, we're going to start off with kind of overview, background, move on to debouncing in React, and then talk about how React Router Remix changed that for us, and then wrap up. So to start off, just a little bit of background. What is debouncing? Debouncing is pretty much whenever you are typing, for instance, right? You're giving user feedback, and you want to have a loading instance, but you don't actually want to have anything that's happening. It's pretty much a set timeout where you're running something or waiting to run something for a set amount of time. Debouncing in React, circa hooks. We used hooks for pretty much everything. Just gonna give an example of what debouncing is really quick. You can see, looking at this example, that we have a search box. In the search box, I am typing. While I am typing, we see a loading indicator, which is what debouncing is. Debouncing in React, we had two primary methods of doing it. The first method of doing it that a lot of people looked at was using debounceCallback. What debounceCallback was, it took a callback function, and wrapped it in a useCallback hook, which memoized it, and then debounced it. So it had this callback that would run after a set amount of time. A lot of time people use a time span like half a second for that. Looking at the example here, you can see that the things that we're really tracking are the value of the text input and the loading state. So as I type, you can watch as the text value is updating. And if you're watching down here at the bottom, you can see the network tab, right? So I'll clear this one more time, and we'll go backwards. And we'll see that even though we're in a loading state, we're not actually making any network requests. And that's because that function is waiting until this time span passes by to actually happen. But we're still showing the user that this loading state is happening. So to kind of give some background as to how this is working is looking at this code, we'll zoom in a little bit, is we have three state variables, right? We have the value, the loading state, and the data. And then we have this callback that we're memoizing here, wrapped in a debounce function. So this is a stable function that will execute after that. I zoomed in a little bit too much. Execute after that half second there, right? Moving down, you can see that we have the input. The input also is doing stuff on change. It's grabbing the value, it's setting loading state, it's setting the value, and it's initiating that callback function, right? Then down here, we'll have some code that we're gonna see. It's pretty consistent, just handling the loading when we have the data, when we don't have data, when there's no search term scenarios. Looking at this though, in 2025, right? As someone that uses React Router every day, you see that we have a lot of React state there. You see that we have a lot of just stuff going on in the code where we're managing things on the client. We have these side effects happening on the on-chains function, right? We're starting to manage state there, and then we execute a callback that has these imperative updates, these side effects happening, right? These things can kind of throw you for a loop if you're not super familiar, if the logic starts to get more and more complex, right? Just some things to think about. I mean, this is perfectly valid. You can build really great product with it. But as we pivoted to React Router at Docker, this was something that we were like, can we improve on this? Moving on, the other example or other hook that a lot of people used, my personal preference was useDebounceValue. useDebounceValue takes the value that the user is entering into the text box, and then it sets that in a second state variable after a certain amount of time passes. And you start executing more things as that value changes, right? So we'll go ahead and look at a little example, kind of similar to the last example where we have the value. We have the debounce value and the loading state. As I start typing in, again, you can see how the value is updating. And as I type, the debounce value is out of sync. But we're still in a loading state as far as the user is concerned, right? And then when the data updates, we have the data right there. So working pretty much the same way as the other one did. Going to the code, though, we can see that things get a little bit simpler now. We have one state variable, a hook, which has another state variable embedded. We're using React Query for this instance. A lot of times you could use SWR Redux for this back when we weren't using React Router. And then we have a derived loading state that's taking the network state and the debounce loading state as well. Looking at the DOM code, we have the input. The input is just maintaining the state of the value. a lot simpler than the other one. We're not initiating any side effects. We're just maintaining the state of the input's value. And then we have the same display stuff. It's going to be pretty common in all of these. This is a lot simpler, a lot more straightforward, a lot more React-y, a lot more derived state. But still, when we started using React Router, we kind of asked ourselves, is this how we want to be building these user flows still? So in comes Remix and React Router, right? Remix really brought about the idea of using web platform patterns, right? The modern web browsers have amazingly powerful tools that previously weren't there. It also brought about the idea of progressive enhancement, right? Building UIs that are derived and simple, and your JavaScript and your UIs are meant to be a sprinkle or addition to add that interactivity, right? It also added really awesome tools and primitives like loaders and actions to do data fetching, data transformations all on the server with client loaders to enable this in spas and also to kind of intercept the request before they make it to the server. It also really pushed native form submissions with navigation state. And then it gave us the ability as UI developers to, in our UI apps, create APIs with resource routes and then fetchers to interact with those. So at Docker, we kind of debounced, or remixed debouncing. So looking at the example here again, this is the first pass that we kind of came up with. Like the first pass that we came up with. So if we type into it, you can see that while I'm typing, we're fetching, we're loading, and then eventually data lands, right? Looking at the code for this example, we can see that in the UI portion, there's nothing really there before the return statement. All we do is declare a fetcher. Looking at the input value here, it's a little bit different than the other ones. We directly initiate the fetch request there with fetcher.load. We're calling into this resource route in our React Router app, and then our display is the same. So there's nothing really going on here in the UI. The UI is purely display elements for the user, and we're making a network request. That network request is handling the debouncing, the data fetching, the data transformation, all of the parts that we were previously handling with React State and other libraries in the client. How this works is we just have a loader. That loader is grabbing the request, it's grabbing query params, it's checking the validity of that, and then waiting. Then it makes the fetch request. Looking at this, you might not, looking at the code for the UI, looking at the resource route, you might think I'm just hitting that API over and over again and I'm not actually debouncing. So to kind of show you what's happening on the network side of things, grab the network tab and type it out again. This is water. And you can see we're canceling a bunch of requests. Those requests are not completing. So when each request cancels, we're going to now start storing the next request. The thing that's happening with this, though, is two bad things here. The first thing is now our users, if they go to the console, can see all these red fetch requests. We're leaking these implementation details to users. And the second, if we go to our code, imagine that this fetch request here is an expensive operation, has lots of network load. We're doing that every single request no matter what, because those fetch requests, even though they're canceled, they're still happening. So this is where we looked for a version 2. It looks about the same as far as the UI. It works about the same, but looking at the network tab, we just typed it all in. We only got one network request. And if we go and look at the UI code for this, we can see that things look about the same. We still just have a fetcher. We still just have fetcher.load, on change, on blur. I added a little bit more validation logic here to give an example of what that could look like. But the UI mostly looks the same. What we did, though, was for our resource routes, we made a little change. We added a client loader. That client loader is basically acting as a client-side API interceptor. Whenever we make that fetch request, the client loader grabs it and runs logic before we actually send it to the API. So you can see in the client loader, on the client's machine, we're grabbing the search param, we're validating it, and then running this timeout, and then hitting the server. You'll also see that this timeout here is a bit more complicated than some of the other ones. We have some abort controller stuff going on, And this is basically to say, once this request gets canceled, stop, don't go farther. If we didn't have the abort controller stuff, even though we would have solved the red squiggly lines here, we still would have been putting all this load on our APIs. This is only possible because of the way Remix has implemented itself. It's brilliant. It's really empowered us at Docker to do the things that we wanted to do. We have really been enabled by Remix and React Router to split our applications apart by concerns. Our UIs are simple. They take data, derive what we should render, and display it to users. Any JavaScript in the UI now is purely there for interactivity purposes. And then all our data fetching, all our data transformation is happening on servers. And loaders run once, actions run once. There's no more re-render bugs caused by data manipulation, which is really great. Yeah. A little bit of a rough start, but that's basically what I had to talk about. I also want to give a big shout out to Rostopedia. He's actually in the Zoom call, which is awesome. He's one of my coworkers, and we spent a solid day going back and forth saying, this isn't good enough yet, trying to figure this out. So this was really awesome, and big shout out to him. Really popular in the, or frequent in the React Router Discord, so you might see him around. But thank you. You can find me online anywhere at Christian Farris, no vowels. Yes, Ryan?
I just had a question about, since you're creating a new promise and you're not necessarily resolving or rejecting it at any point in time, like if the route, or if the client loader gets aborted, right? That promise never gets resolved or rejected. Does that cause any issues with things like garbage collection or something like that?
I believe that's what the abort controller is trying to do. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because the abort controller is cleaning up the timeout as soon as the request aborts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have two questions here. First, preface to the first question. Is this primarily being used in Docker Desktop?
I do
Or
not think
elsewhere?
we're using this in Docker Desktop, so I primarily work on web interfaces at Docker.
Right.
But if you've signed up, you've touched code that pretty much does stuff like this.
Got it.
Yeah, we're using this for simple searches. We're using this for forms with multiple inputs that all the inputs need to be debounced. We're using this in forms with some fields that need debouncing, some that need intense schema validation logic. But yeah, we've used this all over a web application over the past year and a half. And it's really stood up to the test.
Got it. The follow-up I had for that would be, how long did it take you guys to refactor to use this versus what you had been using previously?
I don't know, to be honest. This is purely technical debt work, right? So it's stuff that people are doing between product feature work, right? So you're pulling these tickets whenever you want. We've had new people on board to the team, and this is a little different. I mean, if you've been doing React for the past 5 years, you're used to the first two initial methods of debouncing, right? So this is something that we'll typically, when someone new joined the team, we'd be like, hey, go fix this debounce thing. Yeah, but I mean, I think right now we don't have, I think last fall we got rid of our last React query usage. Yeah, I don't know if that's.
No, it's helpful evaluating our timeline to replace some of this. But then last one too, you mentioned sort of simplifying your components, visual components. Do you guys do a good amount of unit testing around that? And has it made it more simple to do so if you are?
Yeah, so we do a lot. My team specifically does a lot of unit testing. We probably hover around 80% test coverage. We use the create routes stub. And yeah, the create route stub is great. It makes unit testing pretty awesome, in my opinion. Other people will have different opinions on that. Had some conversations about that today. But yeah, I mean, it's a flavor. As soon as you get used to it, it's pretty nice.
Any other questions? All right, round of applause for Christian.
Hi, I'm Mark. I am a UX designer, the UX design lead at a... Okay, so I will be talking about vibe coding a UX prototype with React Router today. Hi, I'm Mark. Mark Malstrom. I am a lead UX designer at a boutique consultancy here in Austin called BP3. We work with a bunch of enterprise clients to help them redesign their applications to follow a process flow defined with a process engine, something like Camunda, or some of the products that IBM offers. While what my title is UX designer, what I actually do is more along the lines of a UX engineer. I build a lot of prototypes using code in order to show them to users and see how they react. So I know that this word raises a lot of eyebrows sometimes for reasons like this. And reasons like this. Where bad things happen in production. So I will give you the disclaimer, don't find code in or for production, please. So what is user testing? I realize not everybody is familiar with the UX process or has the privilege of working with UX designers. So in the entire product process here, we have the research, define, design, prototype, and validate cycle. After that, it goes off to developers to build, QA tests it, and we launch it out to users. What we're really looking at here is the validate part of the cycle and the prototype part of the cycle. This is where we build something that is good enough for us to show to users and get some feedback. We show it to real users, and we funnel that back into the process and refine it until it's ready to release. So the core elements of a usability test, Nielsen Norman Group, a great UX resource. You'll have a facilitator who is guiding the user through a preset script of tasks that we want them to do. These tasks are realistic activities that the participant would actually do in real life using data as close to real as possible. And then the participants are typically the persona who would actually be using this product. So trying to test with real users when at all possible. And luckily, because we work on a lot of internal tools, we have access to internal users that we can talk to fairly easily. So why would you user test? There's a lot of good reasons. We can find problems in the design that users actually don't understand how that weird type of head works, or they didn't understand that text actually meant that thing. We can get ideas from users. I mean, you talk to users who are doing the job that you're designing the software for, and they probably have better ideas about how to improve their workflow than we do. And so showing them the possibilities gives them ideas about how to expand that. And then we can also learn about how the users do things. We can talk to them about if they're sitting at their desk while they're doing this, or if they're taking their laptop out into the field, what kind of connection they're on, what size screen they're using, all these kinds of things. So then there's the question of why would you create a code prototype? With Figma, we have the ability to create these pretty realistic looking prototypes where we take the designs that we've made and we connect them up with hotspots, and then you can click on buttons to transition pages or change states of things. The problem here is that it's not very expressive. There's a handful of things you can do. You can sort of see a user flow about how you might go through the application, but if you're trying to refine something like a filtering mechanism or a type ahead or a chatbot, it's really hard to do that, especially with text in Figma. In a Figma prototype, you can't have the user type text. They just sort of have to click in a box. We make the text appear and say, oh, look at that. It magically appeared. That's awesome. So it doesn't give us as high a fidelity as if we write the thing in real code. And we can do that now. So I was working on something new at work recently. And it was an opportunity to build one of these UX prototypes and finally use an agent to do so. And so in evaluating this, I had about 2.5, 3 days to work on this. I decided I wanted to go with React Router in my stack. React is a popular choice for a framework, and the robot is really good at writing React code. So that makes it easy versus something more obscure. React Router in framework mode has a bunch of really strong conventions and primitives. So you have built-in ways to do data loading. You have built-in ways to mutate that data. You have built-in ways to get that in a node environment if you're using novel packages or you need to write files or write to a database to simulate some things. It's got good file system routing conventions that are well documented, so the robot knows how to make a new route. And there's a lot of examples for things. So for instance, like the modal pattern where you can have a route that is your modal. And it just sort of comes over with the state of the URL. There's lots of examples on how to do that. There's a huge repo of examples in the Remix organization. Now we have type-safe routes. So the robot knows exactly what data it's working with as it crosses the boundary between Node and the browser. So there's a lot of good structure here that makes it really easy for the agent to create an app like this. And then the last thing is Brooks's agent rules for React Router are really good. He wrote these, actually cursor rules, but might as well be the same thing. And they're very thorough. They've got a lot of information about the current state of the framework, especially what not to do from previous states of the framework. And that worked really well in my Claude.md. Okay, so I'll show you a little bit of what I built here. Look at it here. So what we were building is for a different type of scheduling. I white labeled this just so we could show it without showing off the client. But you can imagine it's scheduling of some sort. We have shift management here for nurses at a hospital. And so sometimes it's really tedious to go into one of these options and find the nurse you want to schedule and find when they're scheduled and figure out how to move them around and whatever. Even the best UX there might be really tedious to do. So one of the things we were thinking, and we pitched to the client, is what if we used a chatbot to do this? Have this built-in chatbot here as part of the page. You can click on this, and you can say you want to update a shift. It'll come up. It'll ask you what department and unit, and you can just tell it, for instance, it's got the database in the background. Sarah Johnson has a shift in the West Wing ICU. I need to change it to tomorrow at 8 p.m. So we can send that off. The agent will do its thing. And it will bring us back a card. And so this was one of the things we were thinking would be sort of novel in a agentic sort of assistant here, is you can have the agent fill in the UI, and then if the agent made any mistakes, you can change it pretty easily right here. You know, say it was supposed to be Eastern time, you can do that. And then it's easy to just confirm the changes. Gives you the option to copy and update. You can send info to different parties that might be involved with that change. And then you have the option to do something else. So one of the things we showed the client, you can actually, because we have access to the database, you can query the database and we can find that we actually changed Sarah's shift. Being able to actually interact with something this complex through real code gives us an opportunity for a lot better feedback from the users versus trying to do something like this in Figma. So the way this is done here is we have, since I did this in about 30 hours, and what it amounted to was trying to do it as quickly as possible. And so I opted to use Claude Code because Claude Code has this awesome SDK where you can sort of run it in a headless mode, and it's even got a TypeScript library to interact with that. So that was the fastest way for me to get up and running with this. So this is all based on the Claude Code SDK, actually. Here I've created a sort of component registry that says, here are the React components you have access to. Here's a description of what they are and the props you'd need to provide to fill in. And so further down here, we actually include those in the system message. So the system prompt gets a lot of the context because Claude Code's SDK doesn't have tool calling, it doesn't have, it has access to MCP servers, but that was too complicated with the time frame I had. And so I went ahead and sort of brute forced tool calling by giving it these schemas as part of the system message and then telling it to really, really only ever return JSON. And the JSON should look like this. And it's really important to only ever return JSON. So then we could take that and stream these responses. This was another great thing about React Router is there is several packages and tutorials and things out there about how to do server-sent events, which is how basically all of these agents send down their responses. It's easier than trying to set up WebSockets. It's all HTTP, and you can use Remix utils to do it really easily. So set up a route here, and then we are able to, somewhere in here, we emit as different responses come in through the agent. We have, in this loop, we are parsing components, and we're basically just returning a JSON down in the component. It's a lot of action. We're basically just getting a JSON blob that we can turn into messages and components. Okay, so what did I learn from this? Claude Code is the best agentic tool I've used. I wrote probably 100 lines of code by hand in this project. And a lot of it was I had a Figma file from my designer working with on this, and I could crop out screenshots and drop those in and say, look at the screenshot and make that for me. I could really just blaze through things. And I think part of that was Opus. Opus is expensive. And I learned this when I accidentally switched to Opus one evening and forgot, and then the next day accidentally used Opus for a full day, and it was expensive. But there's a reason Opus is expensive. It's really good. I think I got more work done on that day than I did any other day. You don't really have to go back and forth with it a lot. It can solve the problems pretty simply and easily. A thorough Claude.md is very important. In order to not fall into the pitfalls of the agent wants to go and use effect. That's something that Claude really tries to do. You put that in your Claude.md in the right way. You sort of workshop with it about, why did you do that when it was in my Claude.md? What do I need to change about my Claude.md in order to make you never do that again? So a lot of those things, one thing I found was I would go to ChatGPT and use O3 with research and say, here's a thing I'm trying to use. I want to make sure I'm using the most up-to-date version of it with the current API, and I want best practices. And it'll do its research thing, which takes, what, 30 minutes or whatever, and come back with some markdown documentation for you that you can put in your Claude.md. And I found I sort of did that with all of the core technology I was using, and that really helped. I also think a design system that has both Figma and React components is pretty essential. Because I was working with a designer who was using material design as his design system, and he had built out these screens, and we had talked about the interactions, I was able to really easily take some of those designs and transform them using these pre-built components rather than having to write a bunch of CSS and figure out how to place things and spend a lot of time on the visual design. So I think that was really important. The last thing is, I realized after I did this that it is possible to create a code prototype now in the less time than it takes me to create a Figma prototype. It's really tedious to create a Figma prototype. You have to wire up all the hotspots, create every state in between. If you have any transitions or changes or things like that, there's often more pages you have to create because Figma doesn't have the affordance for this stuff. And as I discussed before, you still have the issue of it's not very high fidelity. So with the ability to sort of vibe code these things where you're not using a real database, you don't care if you get hacked, it's not even going out publicly, you're sending it on private intranet to users to look at and play with, I think this is a really great use case for that. Thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I'd like to ask you, you said that you were using Claude Code in headless mode. Was that like for that agent demo, like the chat that you showed? Could you speak on a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So it is for that. I was using it to build the app, but I was also using it behind the scenes in the SDK mode. The SDK mode allows you to call it with, I think it's -p, basically puts it into headless mode where it will stream JSON back to you through standard N. And they have, I think because they wrote Claude code in TypeScript, they have a TypeScript API on NPM that you can just use that's really easy to use. So because I could use my easy $20 a month Claude account with Claude Code without having to figure out setting up token pricing and all that stuff, I went with that because it was quick and easy to prototype with in that prototype.
Okay, yeah, thanks. That's really interesting. I haven't heard of it kind of being used in that application before, so thanks.
Yeah, sure thing.
You said use material design as your design system. Do you think you would have been as successful if you had used something that wasn't like an open source design system that had a lot of examples on the internet?
I think part of the success of using material design was that I did go out to O3 and say, hey, create a really good agent instruction set for this in Markdown. I think if you can get somebody human to do that for your non-open source design system and be really explicit about the patterns that you use. And I think you can probably get pretty close.
Okay, thank you.
Interesting.
Yeah, similarly, I was telling Daniel earlier that if you've never used MCPs, the Deep Wiki MCP is really, really great, and I would highly encourage it. It can index and has already indexed many of the open source GitHub repositories, but you can also make a free Devon account and make it index your private repositories, and then you can auth it so it can access those documentation. I found that very helpful with our code bases, which are millions of lines of code between two languages, and so it was very helpful to like have it chart basically this documentation about here's how the Ruby part works, here's how the JavaScript part works, and break it down. But also the Figma. Have you tried the Figma MCP, Mark?
I have used it for not good things. I've used it for creating user stories, which is, I'm sure, not the intention, but
Yeah,
I've never tried to make code out of it.
They put a big update out this week that I've not yet tried.
Right.
Previously, though, it was pretty terrible. So I am very curious how models catch up on creating UI and UX design, because most of them are pretty terrible at it, to be honest.
I think it ended up being like 350-ish. No. Not for this particular project. If it was something I really cared about, I mean, I charged it to the company, so who cares? But I would get the $200 a month plan for sure.
It's for the recording.
Your last point, I think, ties to one of your early slides where you show the standard loop of the prototype loop going on to build. I think that it's predicated on the idea that building is expensive. And your last point was vibe coding is good enough for prototyping. I submit to you that it will get better and it will be able to do the build step as well soon. How do you think about that impacting the prototype loop in this, what I would call a classical view of software building?
I think it probably becomes a lot more like beta testing or even A/B testing, where you're doing the validation as part of some sort of production, which I think could be great because you're using much more real data. You're having the users do their job with this thing, and if it's, you can release daily because you're able to crank these things out, I think there's not a lot of risk involved in that as there is today, which is why we have the pre-step.
So don't vibe code in production is just a temporary
For now.
suggestion, right?
Don't
Okay,
do it right
good,
now with the
good.
state of everything.
Any other questions for Mark?
One quick question, like for the way to code the whole thing, each screen. So you send each screenshot to Claude, and that's how like the whole application went?
So what I kind of did it piecemeal at first. I exported individual like cards out of Figma, and because I sort of, it was already broken down by components based on what the designer did in Figma, I knew sort of I wanted those to map to React components. And so I gave it some piecemeal stuff, and then eventually I gave it the whole layout and had it fit things in there. And then there were a lot of points where, like that slide out window, I didn't need to include everything in the background. And so a lot of this was just exporting those directly to the file system, dropping them in the directory and saying, hey, look at /screenshot.png. And I would do that for bugs too, of like, hey, here's what it looks like in the browser, and here's what it's supposed to look like in Figma, fix it.
All right, let's give it up for Mark.
Thank you.
Well, thank you to both our speakers tonight. Really great talks overall. We are always looking for new talks. So if you have talk ideas, feel free to either contact us in the Remix Discord, contact Brooks, and then we can all review together. But contact Brooks, or we do have a forum on the site, right? The current site? Yeah, for the Remix Austin meetup, you can submit there as well. Do we have the slides for the various different talks that you were looking to source? Yeah, a couple of talk ideas that Brooks always likes to put together and Mark likes to put together is type-safe routing, split route modules, view transitions, Vite environment API, Cloudflare Vite plugin, middleware. I actually would love someone to give a middleware talk, actually, because it's like the one thing that React Router is relatively new to React Router, but is super interesting to me. And RSCs. And I'll add one more that's not on here, which is queues, which is something that a lot of people don't understand how they work in JavaScript that I've been messing with. So yeah, if you have any talk ideas, feel free to reach out to Brooks. And then lastly, yeah, Mark has been leading this project, but we are in the process. The existing Remix Austin site already exists, but we're also in the process of rebuilding it. It's an open source repository on GitHub under the Remix Austin organization. And so if you would like to contribute to that, we can do so. Reach out to one of us and happy to get involved. And yeah, we'd love to have you. And the next meetup is September the 3rd. It's always the first Wednesday of the month. And so, yeah, well, if you would like to come, we'd love to have you. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for coming. I think we're good to be here till 9, right? So we got half an hour or a little bit under half an hour to socialize and talk. Sure. Yes, always here. Thankful to Grant and HEB for hosting us every single month and giving us this great space as we've. Okay. But yeah, always here. Cool. Well, thank you guys very much. Thanks. And yeah, if you have any other questions, come find with us after.